So to those of you who have just joined us, welcome to the Meet the Funder session. I'm Liz Griffiths. I'm Rosa's Head of Partnerships, Philanthropy and Communications, and I'll be chairing this session. So we all know that the women and girls sector is underrepresented in charitable funding. And Rosa has to fundraise for every penny we spend, so we know how difficult it can be to secure the money you need for your work. One of our main goals is to help make funding more accessible to the sector. So the point of today is to give you a taste of what funding might be available for your work. We're joined by 5 UK funders. So we have Ella Davey from Henry Smith Charity, Naomi Sampson from Lloyds Bank Foundation, Dobson from the National Lottery Community Fund, Anna Jarvis from Rosa, and Rutendo Ngwena from Smallwood. Welcome everyone. I'm going to ask each to speak for about 5 minutes about their funding. And if you have any questions, please write them in the Q&A box as we go along, and we'll put them to our panelists at the end. If they're for a specific person, please mention this. And we've turned off the chat here, so this will allow everyone to focus on the Q&A. And if you want to see the speakers' bios and links to their organisation's websites, click on the resources button in the Zoom controls and you can find them there. Immediately after this session, you can meet some of the funders in the individual Q&A sessions. So if we don't get to ask your question in this session, you can try to ask it directly in the next. So over to the funders. Let's start with Ella Davey from Henry Smith Charity. Over to you, Ella.
Hi all, so I'm Ella. I'm a grants manager at the Henry Smith Charity, where I lead on the domestic and sexual abuse portfolio. So some of you might be familiar with us. We're a pretty big funder within the UK, and we fund a broader range of organisations that work to address social and economic disadvantage, but a significant amount of our funding goes towards issues that disproportionately impact women and girls. I'm really excited to announce that next week we're actually launching a new strategy, and I'm happy that one of the first grant programs we're launching is going to be a dedicated fund for led by and for organisations providing specialist domestic abuse services. I'm just going to flag now that none of this information is publicly available, so you can't see it on our website at the moment. So I recommend signing up to our newsletter, and then you'll be notified as soon as we launch the strategy and as soon as we open our new grants programs. But I'm still going to talk a little bit about this new grants program. So it's going to be a 5-year running cost grant of 250k. So that's 50 grand per year, and an organisation has that fixed amount, so you don't have to say how much you want, you don't have to provide a budget or anything like that. As I'm not going to be running one of those Q&A sessions later, because we're still in the process of finalising our eligibility criteria, I just wanted to highlight some of the key points around this fund and what the criteria is going to revolve around. So as I said, this is going to be a led by and for organisation, and what we mean by that is your organisation will need to be run, designed and delivered by and for people from marginalised communities such as LGBT+ people, deaf and disabled people, and those from racially minoritized communities. Some of you might be familiar with other funders using something called the DEI data standard, which has quite a strict definition around what it means to be led by and for. We aren't going to apply that. We just mean the majority of your staff and the majority of your board are from the community you support. The other really key criteria to this grant will be around providing that specialist domestic abuse service. So we don't expect it to be the sole focus of your organisation, but we would expect it to be a service delivered by specially trained staff, and it needs to be person-centred and holistic. So when we say that, we're talking about one-to-one support addressing a wide range of needs, working in partnership with other organisations, just supporting an individual through that whole journey. As I say, don't have all the eligibility criteria in place at the moment of time. It's going to be open, but we do know it's going to be open to organisations of all sizes. So there won't be a minimum cap on income or a high cap on income, but we of course will take this into consideration when organisations apply. But what I really recommend is just signing up to our newsletter so you can hear more about it when it's launched. But also, I think they're going to share our email addresses at the end of the conference, so you can contact me personally. And I really strongly encourage people to get in touch with us and discuss whether they're actually eligible or not. We'd much rather have a conversation with you before you spend time applying and really working out whether, yeah, you will be a good fit or not. Thank you.
Thank you, Ella. Sorry, I was on mute. That was great to hear. Yeah, please do sign up to the Henry Smith newsletter so you can hear more details on that when it's announced. So thank you. Now it's over to Naomi from Lloyds Bank Foundation.
Hi everyone, thank you Liz. So quite similarly actually to the Henry Smith Foundation, we have a new strategy coming up, which is very exciting, but we are still in the motion, so not as ready as Henry Smith, I would say. But yeah, it's exciting time. So I'll go through what we currently fund and our current funding programs, and then just kind of give you a little bit of insight into where we're going next, even though that isn't set in stone. So yeah, we're the Lloyds Bank Foundation. We are a grant management funder, and we are an independent charity, but we receive kind of the profits from Lloyds Banking Group very kindly. But we are independent from them, and what we kind of look at through our research and our policy teams is kind of the complex issues that kind of small and local charities are working on, as well as community interest companies around the UK, including Wales, yes, and across the UK, in England, but not in Scotland and not in Ireland, because we have our separate foundations for those. And that is the Halifax Foundation in Northern Ireland, as well as the Bank of Scotland Foundation up in Scotland, obviously. So yeah, what we do is looking at small and local communities, really the grassroots, and trying to feed into that kind of work, because we know, like led by and for the grassroots organisations, they know what's going on the ground, and normally they're run by the people who are in those communities, and we see, you know, community leaders as kind of the forebearers and the strength of communities, really, rather than charities that are just set up, big ones, you know, they're always getting the funding, they've got all the resources, but they're not always in touch with the people on the ground. So yeah, that's kind of our bread and butter. And what we did over the last strategy, and I guess our current strategy, is we've made 3 programs. So we have our specialist program, which covers 8 themes. Themes is a bit of a strange word, but it's basically just kind of the complex issues that we've seen through our research and policy team that people across the UK are really facing. And that's not to say there's not other important issues, but they were kind of the most prominent and the things we really wanted to feed in and support kind of the communities across the UK. So we have, I guess, specifically in terms of the work with women and girls and the Vogue sector, we have our specialist programme running through the sexual violence theme, as well as the domestic violence theme, as well as modern slavery. And of course, there are other areas that affect women across the UK, which don't necessarily have to be within Vogue. So we've got our homeless theme, as well as our addiction theme, our offending theme, which is criminal justice support. All these issues affect women across the UK, and as well we recognise that there's multiple layers to this that people face as well. So yeah, that's kind of our main programme in terms of Vogue. And what else we have is our Racial Equity Fund and our DDPO Fund, which is our Deaf and Disabled People's Organisation funds. So they're our main inclusion funds that we've been running for the last 3 years. So as they kind of say, Racial Equity Fund is about supporting led by and for communities, global majority communities who are feeding into their community. And this is kind of across a spectrum. So with economic support, but also crisis support, and just, yeah, the breadth of kind of areas that people face within their communities, and just, yeah, bringing to empower them and feedback and, yeah, support everyone together. We also, like I said, have our DDPO fund. So that as well is led by and for, and both of these programs, we have relaxed our criteria as we were going with quite, I guess, a hard line, like Ella said, in terms of the 75%, 50% rule, which I'm not sure if everyone's aware of, but that was basically some research done that showed led by and for should be 75% trustees, being led by and for the community, as well as 50% of staff. We've now put that at 51% and 50%, just because we felt it was a bit of a barrier, and we understand kind of communities work together in different ways to be led by and for, and it's better to, yeah, be as helpful and as open as possible rather than creating those barriers. So that's our current rule. We changed that last year, I believe. And yeah, so there are current programs. We also have our local collaborations fund, which some of you may be aware of, which is where we're supporting local community leaders. So whether you're a charity, you must lead that, but you can also be a KIC or a social enterprise, and it's at least 3 organisations working together for kind of a social means. Some of those areas have been asylum seeking support, homelessness support, housing across the UK in terms of provision, numbers of housing, infrastructure. Yeah, we just wanted to really kind of recognise that there's also, outside of the main areas we're working in, seeing communities work together and organisations work together, which also can be a strength to make change in the UK. So yeah, there are our main programmes. As I said, we have a new strategy, so that we're not quite sure what programmes we'll be bringing forward. It is changing a lot, but we're hoping we're keeping to some of the core work that we do. So hopefully, and I'm sure there will be still lots of work we're doing for the women and girls sector. And yeah, so each of them have kind of separate criteria, but we can go through that. You can ask me more questions later on. So I don't want to take up too much time, but yeah, that's a bit about us.
Oh, thank you, Naomi. That was really helpful, and great to hear that there's lots of different themes and funds that women's and girls' work can sit under. Really appreciate that. Thank you. So now we'll move on to Jo Dobson from the National Lottery Community Fund. Over to you, Jo.
I'm afraid I'm getting the message that my video has been disabled. Let me start again. Hello there. Can you see me now?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. So hello, my name is Jo Dobson. I am Head of Funding for the Yorkshire and Humber region at the National Lottery Community Fund. The fund is a non-departmental public body, or Quango, and we are one of the lottery distributors. So we distribute around £700 million a year to projects supporting communities across Great Britain and Northern Ireland. We sort of mirror how the devolved governments run. So we have England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland have separate directorates or departments, if you will, and we also have UK-wide programs. So we have quite a complicated setup, and I understand that sometimes for people applying, it can be quite difficult to get their head around what can I apply for, you know, what am I eligible for? But hopefully, answering some of your questions today, I'll be able to address some of those things. Across the UK, we have our overall strategy, which was launched in 2023, is called It Starts With Community, and there are 4 key missions or headlines, if you like, that we seek to achieve through our funding, which are supporting communities to come together, be environmentally sustainable, helping children and young people thrive, and enabling people to live healthier lives. Now, although none of those have women or girls specifically in the title, that the actual the missions themselves are very broad, and we certainly fund activities for women and girls led organisations and focused organisations across all of those missions. Overarching that, there is our equity mission, meaning that we are seeking to prioritise and support organisations that are led by and or supporting communities that are experiencing disadvantage, discrimination and poverty. And in terms of who can apply, we have that there are differences between the different funds that we have. So again, it would depend on what specifically you're applying for and where, which of our constituent countries, England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland. But in general, we will fund all organisation types, whether you be a registered charity, a company limited by guarantee, a community interest company. But there are often minutiae sort of details. So there were questions in the Q&A about community interest companies, for example. So we will fund them. We'll certainly fund ones which are guaranteed by shares, but limited by guarantee, but those are limited by shares. We may not in some circumstances. It really does depend on which particular fund you're applying for and to which area, which part of the country. Our smallest grants start well technically at £1, so our award for all grants up to £20,000. And in England, our Reaching Communities grants are £20,001 upwards. And we have historically had large strategic investments, which are multi-million-pound investments. And so some of these funds may be for a short period of time, for a year. Others may be multi-year, 5 years or even longer. So we have a whole range of different investments. I think we're the largest community fund in Europe. And what we try to do is be what we define as a relational funder, or describe as a relational funder. So certainly if you're applying for funding in a particular geographical area, there is almost always a funding officer who is assigned to your local authority or the part of your region. And so for the majority of funds that we give out at the moment, that's the case. So where that is the case, a particular fund, it's always good to make contact with the fund and to have conversations before applying, because it gives you a better idea of, is this going to be a good use of my time in terms of what you're applying for. So I will stop there. But again, my email address, as with my colleagues on the call, will be passed on. So if anyone doesn't get the chance to answer or ask any questions, I'm more than happy for you to email me directly. And if I can't answer your question, even if it's for Northern Ireland, it's something I don't deal with, I can pass your query on. So that's me. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. That was really helpful, and really good to know that you encourage people to get in touch with the regional contacts if they're eligible to apply. So thank you. So next speaking will be Anna Jarvis from Rosa. Over to you, Anna.
Thanks, Liz. Hi, everyone. I'm Anna Jarvis, Head of Grants at Rosa. I'm going to start by telling you a bit about Rosa. So hopefully, if you've been to the rest of the conference, you know bits and pieces about us. We were set up in 2008, and we're a grant maker which exists to fund the women and girls sector. So that's our kind of our reason for being here. What drives us is that we want the UK to be a safer, fairer place for women and girls. So we have 3 key areas of work. The first, and the reason you're here today, is that we invest in the women and girls sector. So as Liz mentioned at the start of the session, we're a fundraising grant maker. So that means that we have to fundraise for every penny that we give out to women and girls organisations. And we distribute approximately £1 million a year. Our second objective is around building a resilient sector. So you will have picked up today that we really value the women and girls sector. We see it as an essential part of building a UK society that works for women and girls. So we do this through conducting and sharing research to improve the understanding of the sector's challenges and impact. And we also deliver training and networking opportunities. So this conference is part of that, and also tomorrow's training day that I hope a number of you can join us for. The third element of our work is around inspiring others to invest in the sector. So with the funding we have, we can't possibly kind of meet the funding needs of the women and girls sector. So what we aim to do is to work with other trusts and foundations and philanthropists to increase the overall amount of funding going to the sector. And that's a really important part of our work. I hope it's really evident throughout this conference that we strongly believe in the value of the sector. Our Mapping the Sector research shows that there are over 7,000 women's and girls charities working in the UK, and that's not to mention all the other types of organisations, CICs, unincorporated organisations, community organisations that make up the women and girls sector, providing life-saving frontline services as well as campaigning and advocating for women and girls' rights. And it's been amazing today seeing the huge diversity of different types of organisations that make up that sector. We're very proud of our relationship with women's and girls' organisations, so we design all of our grants programmes with input from women in the sector. And we also work with women from the sector to decide which applications to recommend for funding. I'm now going to tell you a bit about our funding and how you may be able to access it. So the first thing you need to know about Rosa is that we only fund women's and girls' organisations, and we have a definition around that. If you could, if you have a look on our website, we've got quite a kind of strict definition around what we mean by women's and girls' organisation, and it is worth having a look at that before applying to us. So things we would look at to see if you meet our definition. We would look to see if the principal objective of your organisation is to work with women or girls. We would ask if the majority of your organisation's clients, beneficiaries or service users are women or girls. And we would assess whether you have a board of trustees or similar where the chair is a woman and the majority of members are women. And we would also look to see that you have a leadership team that's where the majority are women. If you have any questions about the kind of specifics of that criteria in relation to your organisation, do get in touch. We're really keen to have those conversations before you fill in the form. I'm not going to go through all of our eligibility criteria today, but wanted to stress that we fund charities, we fund community interest companies, and we also fund community groups which aren't charities or companies, so that they're not incorporated yet. You need to be not-for-profit, you need to have a governing document, and you need to have a bank account in the name of your organisation to apply to Rosa. We currently have 3 main grants programmes, so I'm going to tell you about all of them, but only one is open at the moment. So we have our Voices from the Front Line programme, which provides grants for campaigning and influencing work. That's not currently open. We have our Fund Rise, which provides grants for women and girls organisations led by and for Black and racially minoritised women and girls. That fund is currently open, and I'll tell you a bit more about that in a moment. And we also run our Stand With Us grants programme, which provides grants for frontline organisations supporting women and girls who experience male violence. So an important thing to know about Rosa is that you need to sign up to our mailing list in order to find out when we launch funds. So the best way of accessing Rosa's funding and of keeping in touch with what funding we have available is to sign up to our newsletter, and we'll put the link in the chat to help you do that. So those of you who are already signed up will know that in May we launched the second round of our RISE programme, which, like I said, provides funding for Black and minoritised-led women's organisations. This programme closes on Monday, so that's a really important takeaway from this session. So here's a little bit more information about this programme, and I'm really happy to take questions in the Q&A session afterwards, with the Rosa Q&A session, where we can talk about a bit more of the detail. So the purpose of the fund is to strengthen organisations led by and for Black and racially minoritised women. So by that we mean organisational development. The fund is for organisations that have an income of between 30,000 and 300,000. Organisations can apply for up to £40,000 to fund organisational development work. And like I said, the deadline is on Monday, the 23rd of June, so that's next week. So like I say, please do come and join our Q&A session after this panel if you'd like to know more. Rosa, we know how precious your time is, and I know that's the case for all the other funders that have joined me here on this panel. So our application forms are as straightforward as we can, and alongside financial support, we also offer training. I'm conscious that you're all taking in a lot of information today, so I've got 3 takeaways for you. Firstly, it's worth finding out if your organisation meets Rosa's definition of a women and girls organisation before you apply, and we're happy to help you do that working out. Please do sign up to our newsletter to find out when we launch funds and when we're putting on opportunities like this conference. And take a look at Rise and find out if it would be right for your organisation. And the deadline is Monday. That's all from me. Thanks very much, Liz.
Anna, that was great, and a really good set of takeaways there for everyone. So now on to our final speaker, who is Rutendo from Smallwood. Over to you, Rutendo.
Thank you, Liz. Hello, everyone. My name is Rutendo, and I am the Shifting Power and Learning Manager at the Smallwood Trust. I am passionate about supporting the women and girls sector and shifting power to those closest to the issues. I personally come from a frontline background myself, having led a grassroots women's organization. So this work is deeply personal and aligned with my values. Smallwood's mission is to help women become more financially resilient, and I'll tell you a little bit more about who we are, our journey as a funder, and how we're working with the sector to fund long-lasting change. So we are a specialist women's funder. We were founded over a century ago, so we've existed for a really long time. We started off as an individual grants giver, giving individual women grants. But over time, we recognized that short-term support is not enough. And what we needed was more structural and long-term change. And so this insight has driven our evolution as a grant maker. And overall, our approach now is best characterized by our funding streams, which are characterized in 3 ways. So firstly, you fund frontline delivery. We're really committed to empowering the women's sector by strengthening their expertise, confidence, and recognition as experts in what you do. We recently dispersed £5.8 million in funding directly to the women's organizations, which covered frontline delivery, as well as some of their core costs, which reinforces our commitment to the sector as a whole. We also fund local collaborations working together to create sustainable long-term change. I think we have about 8 place-based change networks across the country. And lastly, we fund influencing organizations that advocate for better policies and structural improvements for women's financial resilience. So these 3 strains combined help us to fund frontline delivery, systems change, and ensure that the impact that the women's sector creates is deep and long-lasting. We have a deep commitment to learning and power sharing at Smallwood. We prioritize creating spaces for shared learning and collaboration across the sector. We've recently launched in this year our new initiative called Learning Circles, which bring together frontline women's organizations, funders, and influencing partners to connect, reflect, and share insights. These spaces are designed to shift power dynamics and center the voices and expertise of the women's sector. And through convening these spaces, we foster trust, peer support, and joint problem solving, and help organizations feel heard, valued, and build sustainable relationships with funders. Like many of the funders on this panel, we have a new strategy coming up. So for more updates, please do visit our website to see what our new strategy will be later in the year and find out how we'll be working towards a brighter and more financially resilient future for women and how you can be a part of that future. Thank you.
Thank you, Rutendo. What a great ambition to have. So now we're going to move on to some questions. We've been taking questions in the Q&A box as we go along. Obviously, you'll have a chance to ask more questions at the end if you can't get through all of them. But I'm going to kick off with the first question, and this is to all of the funders. The question is, which of you work with CICs, and will any funder support community organisations that are not registered charities? Now, would anybody like to take that?
I can start with that one. So at Henry Smith, we do fund community interest companies and any not-profits. Some of it, the details we're still figuring out. As I kind of said, still working on the eligibility criteria, but the aim is to fund not-for-profits that as long as they have a charitable aim, then it should be fine. But we'd always recommend, if you're not sure, to give us a call and we can work it out with you whether you're eligible or not.
Thanks, Ella.
I can come in as well. So we also do fund community interest companies. I think the most important thing is demonstrating your commitment to serving women, any information on track record, and your alignment with our mission.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to step in? Yeah, Anna.
Rosa, we also fund community interest companies.
Great, thank you.
I keep seeing Joe go for the button, but I'll jump in, Joe. Yeah, at Lloyds Bank Foundation, we do fund community interest companies and registered charities and CIOs, but they're the only ones we do at the moment.
Thanks, Naomi. And Joe?
I've managed to unmute myself now. Where's the unmute button? We will, in principle, we will fund any organisation that is not for profit. So it could be a registered charity, you could be a CIO, you could be a community interest company. With community interest companies, they get slightly more complicated because you have those that are limited by guarantee, which generally aren't an issue for funding. Those that are limited by shares. We sometimes will fund, sometimes won't. It will depend on the detail that's in your governing document, what it says about use of any profits, inverted commas, asset locks, things like that. And the other thing to bear in mind for us is that whilst we don't formally require you in all circumstances to be incorporated, if you were to apply for £1 million or something, or particularly if you want to apply for a very large capital sum of money, we would be unlikely, it's not impossible, but it's very unlikely to fund you, partly because there'd be a big risk to your management committee, people running your organisation. And so we'll take that into account. But in principle, we will fund any organisation type that isn't for profit.
Thanks, Joe. That's really helpful. So another question is, how do funders plan to address the ever-increasing demand for funding? We applied for a fund which was around 3 million. However, organisations had applied for over 60 million. What would be the solution to this problem? Would anybody like to answer that?
I'm happy to start. I mean, the solution is more money, as like everyone on this call knows that, and that's why we are trying to persuade, to work with other trusts and foundations, and thanks to our colleagues here today for being here, to prioritise women and girls sector more in their funding. At Rosa, we have, I suppose, developed our programmes over the last few years very much with that competition in mind. So we try very hard not to have, I suppose, what sometimes gets talked about as a kind of high rejection rate. So we look to only attract in the region of the number of applications that we're able to fund. Obviously, that there are we always have to turn some down. But that's part of the reason for our very strict criteria and our very focused funding, is that we don't want to attract hundreds of applications that we can't fund, because we know it wastes women and girls organisations' time. It's not a good use of time to apply for funding where you've only got a 1 in 400 chance of getting the funding. But absolutely appreciate that does mean that often you'll be looking through funding programmes and thinking, oh gosh, here's another one where I don't meet the criteria. So it's not the solution. The solution is that more money is needed. But we hope that by being really focused with designing programmes with the amount of funding that we have in mind, at least saves time and makes us be as transparent as we can be.
Thanks, Anna. Would anybody else like to add any comments to that, or should I move on to the next question?
I think I just say that's a similar thing, in that I think we, probably a lot of funders, but certainly we need to get better at being really clear on what is eligible, what people can apply for, because it doesn't create suddenly a huge amount of money, but it does mean organisations think, actually, people don't waste their time applying for things that they're never going to get funding for. So that's a basic thing for funders. But fundamentally, it's a challenge for all of us, because there's a growing social need. There's been years and years of cuts to publicly funded services, and so a lot of people are coming to us for things they wouldn't have done before, and it's a difficult position to be in.
Yeah, just jump in if that's okay, Liz. So yeah, we're at the Lloyds Bank Foundation, a bit like Anna was saying, we do try to put things in place, in not making it strict criteria, but really clear. So essentially, we're not wasting people's time, because we know how many applications, bid writers, even kind of CEOs whose role it isn't even to write a bid, are having to spend, in putting in that effort. So we do have our pre-application calls, which we host through Calendly. So that's a really quick, easy call with one of the grants officers, or a regional manager, or someone from our teams, who will have a chat with you about your eligibility and answer those questions, so you don't have to waste your time, and also just so we can kind of get a flavour of your organisation and help you pull out things that maybe you wouldn't have thought of to put in your application. They're always nice sessions, because for me, I'm doing kind of desk space a lot. I don't really get to come out to see new organisations, so it's nice to have those chats, and we really do welcome them. We also have our quiz, so before you apply to any of our programmes, you can just go through those, and it tells you our key core eligibility steps. So again, you don't waste your time. But I'd also echo the fact is, businesses, I think, need to be doing more in terms of, giving money into communities, and the cuts, as Joe said, really aren't helping at the government and council levels. So with our research and policies team, we really try to kind of pump that information out, and kind of reach out to those people, governments, MPs, to employ them to do more for communities. So, and I would echo as well what well, not echo, but say Rosa's recent report on kind of the funding sector, and how much women and girls are not getting, is something we've actually used in kind of our work as well, to push that out. So yeah, working together as funders, I think, is a big thing we're all trying to do to connect and make our voices louder, in terms of calling people where the money is, to give more money to the people, really.
Thank you, Naomi. I'm glad to hear the research is being used. So another question. So what support is available to help work for umbrella and national women's organisations?
I can answer this one. So our grants program would fund national organisations. So we kind of recognise with a lot of led by and for groups that the populations are spread over a much broader area. So it can be really hard to have a specialist organisation within a really rural region. So we will be funding national organisations under that. Unfortunately, though, we wouldn't be funding infrastructure organisations. And that's not something that at this moment in time we are looking to do.
Thank
you, Ella. Does anybody else want to step in? Or
yeah, we certainly do. We fund UK-wide, England-wide, Scotland-wide, etc., or projects and multi-regional ones that might cover, I don't know, Yorkshire and London or whatever. So we certainly fund wide geographic areas. I think the question in the chat had two bits to it. One was about umbrella bodies, and others talked about influencing change. So we certainly do have funding now that explicitly is about influencing change, and that's a bit of a change in itself for the fund with our new strategy. So some of our slightly tweaked funding criteria will explicitly refer to that. So we will certainly look at support systems change, etc. But on more what might be called traditional infrastructure, usually providing training, etc., we don't have anything specific on that. At the moment, we don't have a particular infrastructure program. If a infrastructure body was delivering something which was in line with those different missions, or one of the different missions that I'd mentioned earlier, then potentially it could still be, it could still apply, but it would have to be very clear about how it's meeting our general criteria. And I should just repeat what I was saying, that again, we have England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland. I'm not an expert on all the other countries, but so anything I say to you, particularly if you're not in England, you know, I can point you in the direction if you want referrals to the appropriate people, and you can also look on our website.
Thanks, Jo. That's really helpful.
Yeah.
And I think we've probably got time for one last question, which is: do any of the organisations fund sexual violence prevention?
Yes, we do, through our specialist programme, which, as I said, we are currently looking at which programmes we'll run under our new strategy. But yeah, sexual violence in terms of survivors, supporting survivors, historic, recent, and also prevention work, and that can cover a broad area.
Yeah. We do as well, so not as a specific program, but we recognize that it's one of the reasons that may cause a woman or to be less financially resilient, or just upset her life and her general kind of economic well-being. So we definitely do provide funding, and you can come in and, you know, tie in how sexual violence and your support around that ties into our mission, and funding is also available for that.
We don't have a specific fund for that, but I know that we do in my region, for example. We do fund some of that work. Again, if it sort of falls within our, you know, wider themes.
Thanks, Jo.
Just going to jump. Oh, sorry. I was just going to jump in and say currently we don't fund any prevention work, but it is something that we're looking into as part of our new strategy.
Thanks, Ella. So I appreciate there have been a lot of questions in the Q&A. So if you have specific questions for funders, please feel free to come and join the sessions afterwards, where you can put specific questions to each four of our funders. But I just want to say a huge thank you to all of the panelists for their presentations and for answering those questions. So thanks to Ella, Naomi, Anna, Jo and Rutendo, and of course thanks to all of you for attending this session and for engaging so well with it. We hope you found it useful. So next, and until 4:25, we have the individual Q&A sessions with 4 of our panelists. So you can come along and chat to Jo, Naomi, Rutendo and Anna. So when we close this session, you just need to return to the lobby and choose which session you'd like to join. And so all that is left for me to say is good luck with your fundraising, and please enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you. Bye.